The Young and the Restless spoilers. The aftermath of Damien's death left a permanent scar across Genoa City, but none deeper than the one carved into Lily's heart. His absence was a void that no amount of reason or comfort could fill, a silence too deafening to ignore, a wound that refused to close. Yet while the world moved on, brushing off his demise as just another dark chapter in a town long familiar with tragedy, Lily found herself trapped in a liminal space where grief clung to her like a second skin. At first, she mourned quietly, privately, convinced that time would dull the pain. But nothing could have prepared her for the revelation that came weeks later, the unmistakable signs that her body was no longer hers alone. The morning nausea, the fatigue, the strange cravings. All of it culminated in a test result that confirmed what she already knew deep down: she was pregnant. And the father was Damien. The realization struck her like lightning through her soul. The child was the last remnant of a man whose life had been violently cut short, a man she hadn't planned to build a future with, but whose presence had shaken her to her core. She could already feel her world tilting, crumbling beneath the weight of the secret she now carried. Telling anyone felt impossible, but keeping it to herself only compounded the suffocating pressure of her situation. She knew she couldn't do this alone. And so, against every instinct screaming in protest, she turned to the one man whose name still lingered like a bad taste in her mouth: Cain. Their past had been a labyrinth of betrayal, love, resentment, and impossible forgiveness. Lily had told herself she had shut that door permanently, that there was no version of her life in which Cain played a meaningful role again. But desperation blurred boundaries. When she sat across from him, her voice trembled not with fear but with the unbearable vulnerability of someone admitting weakness. She confessed everything, not just about the pregnancy, but the crushing fear that she wasn't strong enough to bring a child into the world without support. And Cain, true to the man he had always been when his ego eclipsed his empathy, recoiled. He wasn't violent. He wasn't cruel. But he was cold, detached, and disturbingly pragmatic. His words fell like hammer blows: he didn't want to raise another man's child, especially not Damien's. That was the line, and he would not cross it. Lily didn't scream or cry. She simply nodded, thanked him for his honesty, and left with her shoulders straighter than before. But inside, she fractured. In the days that followed, Lily lived in limbo. She avoided phone calls, ignored emails, declined invitations. She existed in a fog of dread, haunted by what-ifs and maybes, unsure of how to navigate this impossible new reality. It wasn't until a routine checkup with her obstetrician that the fog lifted, only to be replaced by a far more devastating storm. The doctor's face twisted with discomfort as she gently delivered the news: something was wrong. The fetus had a rare and aggressive condition that could severely compromise its chances of survival. The prognosis wasn't hopeless, but it was grim. Further testing was required. Complications could arise. And Lily would have to decide, soon, if she had the emotional and physical strength to carry the pregnancy to term. Lily broke down in the parking lot, the weight of everything collapsing on top of her in one brutal moment. She cried for the baby she hadn't yet met, for Damien whose memory had now become a torment instead of a comfort, and for the loneliness that no one could see from the outside. She thought she had been through everything: betrayals, divorces, deaths, but this was something else entirely. This was a private war between heart and logic, love and pain, memory and reality. But grief had never been a stranger to Lily, and over time, her sorrow calcified into resolve. She poured herself into research, scouring every medical article, every clinical trial, every anecdotal report that offered even a shred of hope. She consulted specialists across the country, made appointments in cities she had never dreamed of visiting, and kept a journal of questions to ask. She became a woman obsessed, not because she was naive, but because she needed to believe that love, even one forged in chaos, deserved a second chance to leave something behind. Every heartbeat she saw on the ultrasound, no matter how faint or irregular, felt like a promise she couldn't let go. Despite everything, Cain remained on the periphery, distant but observant. He didn't reach out again, but word traveled fast in Genoa City, and he heard enough to know that Lily's situation had worsened. Part of him was tempted to intervene, not out of compassion for Damien's child, but because he had once loved Lily so deeply that her suffering still echoed within him. But pride held him back, a stubborn refusal to be part of something he couldn't control. Meanwhile, the Newman family began whispering among themselves, unsure of what to make of Lily's reclusive behavior and her growing silence about the future of her business ventures. Nick grew suspicious, Sharon reached out gently but was rebuffed, and even Victor's eyes narrowed as he considered whether Damien had left behind more than just chaos and betrayal. One night, alone in her bedroom, Lily cradled her growing belly and whispered an apology to the child inside her. She didn't know if she could save them. She didn't know if she could survive losing them. But she swore she would try. If nothing else, the baby deserved that much. In a moment of desperate vulnerability, Lily called Nate. Not for advice, but for comfort, real comfort from someone who understood the language of medical fear. Nate, though blindsided, responded with the quiet strength of someone who knew how to hold pain without judgment. He didn't pretend to have answers. He didn't make promises. But he sat beside her, listened, and promised to help her fight, whatever that meant, however far they had to go. For the first time since learning of the illness, Lily didn't feel alone. As the weeks dragged on, the risks multiplied. Lily suffered bleeding, exhaustion, and sleepless nights. Every test result brought more questions than answers. And yet she kept going, driven by a force she couldn't explain, a need to prove to herself, to the world, to Kane, and even to Damien's memory, that this child mattered. That even something born of tragedy could be worth saving. When the doctors finally presented her with an experimental treatment option, she didn't hesitate. She signed the consent forms, even knowing the odds were slim and the dangers high. But she had made her choice. In private, she recorded a video message to the child, just in case. Her voice cracked, but her gaze was steady. She told them about Damien, about how he wasn't perfect but he had a fire that burned bright and fast. She told them about Kane, about how some people couldn't handle the weight of responsibility but that didn't make them evil. And she told them about herself, how she was flawed, afraid, tired, and sometimes angry. But how she loved them already, more than anything she could explain. When the treatment began, her body ached in ways she didn't know were possible. She lost weight. Her skin grew pale. Her energy vanished. But her determination remained. With Nate by her side, acting as both physician and friend, she faced the procedures with quiet bravery. And slowly, miraculously, the baby began to stabilize. Not perfectly. Not without ongoing risks. But enough. Enough to hope again. And that was when Kane came back, not with apologies, but with questions. He wanted to understand why she was fighting so hard, why she hadn't given up, why she hadn't even considered terminating. Lily didn't give him the comfort of an easy answer. She simply said that sometimes love doesn't die with the person who inspired it. Sometimes it transforms, becomes something else, something meant to be protected at all costs. Whether Kane will rise to the occasion, or whether Lily will raise this child alone, remains uncertain. But one thing is clear. This child, this fragile echo of Damien's existence, has already rewritten the future of everyone around them. And Lily, battered and broken though she may be, is standing tall in the center of the storm, because love, even in its darkest forms, is still love. And it might just be enough to save them both. Absolutely, I'll continue the story with the new developments you've provided. I'll expand on Lily's internal conflict between keeping Damien's baby or choosing abortion due to the child's illness. I'll include Amy's perspective as a voice of reason and concern, creating emotional tension and deepening the moral dilemma. The tone will remain intense, emotionally rich, and logically structured in long, immersive prose with minimal paragraph breaks, just as you prefer. Please give me a moment to compose this continuation. even as the doctors quietly suggested that Lily consider the pragmatic option, even as test results painted a cruel portrait of what this child might face, she found herself holding tighter to the life inside her, not loosening her grip. Every flicker on the monitor felt like a defiance of fate, every heartbeat an echo of Damien's legacy. The child was his, and that truth pulsed through her more powerfully than any pain or warning sign. In a world so quick to erase what couldn't be explained or controlled, she refused to erase Damien's last trace. It wasn't about martyrdom or denial, it was about meaning. And in this moment, as fractured and isolated as she felt, this baby was the only meaning left. But meaning alone couldn't make her strong. Her body was beginning to betray her. Fatigue overtook her days. Her vision blurred. Simple tasks became unbearable. Still, she carried on, driven by sheer resolve and something deeper. Something wounded and maternal and fiercely protective. But it wasn't long before someone close noticed the change. Amy had been watching from afar, keeping her distance out of respect, but silence was no longer an option. Amy came to Lily's house one afternoon with that expression Lily had come to dread, part pity, part caution, all concern. There were no pleasantries, no pretense. Amy sat across from her and said the one thing no one else had dared to say aloud. "Lily, maybe you need to let this go." The words weren't cruel. They were soft, almost pleading. But to Lily, they cut deeper than any medical diagnosis. Amy reminded her that Damien was gone. That this baby was not him. That holding on to his ghost would not bring him back. Amy's voice shook slightly as she spoke of what life might look like for Lily, how she might collapse under the burden of a child who may never know a healthy day, how this wasn't just about honor or love, but survival. Lily listened, staring at the floor, fists clenched in her lap. Amy's words rang with truth, but they collided violently with the storm inside her. "You have so much ahead of you," Amy said gently, "but you won't see it if you keep anchoring yourself to someone who's no longer here." That night, Lily sat alone by the window, the silence of the house thick and suffocating. She remembered the moment Damien had first kissed her, the way his chaos had felt strangely liberating, the reckless beauty of his presence. But she also remembered the destruction, the secrets, the cold silence that followed him into every room. He was gone, but his shadow remained, and now she was asking herself, was this baby truly a gift, or a chain? Would bringing it into the world honor his memory or condemn her to a future filled with pain, sacrifice, and regret? She hated herself for even thinking that way. The guilt consumed her. But the doubt had rooted itself now, seated by Amy's words, watered by the brutal reality of her prognosis. She returned to the doctor for another appointment, hoping for a miracle, dreading confirmation. The news was the same. The illness was still progressing. There were new risks. If she continued, she might lose the baby anyway, and possibly endanger herself in the process. The doctor spoke clinically, cautiously, outlining options. Termination. Induced labor. Early interventions. Clinical trials. But every option came with a cost. And Lily began to see what Amy meant. It wasn't about giving up. It was about facing reality. Still, she couldn't say the words. She couldn't picture walking into a clinic, consenting to the end of something that felt sacred. It wasn't just a pregnancy, it was a promise. But promises couldn't protect her from the truth, and every night the weight of that truth dragged her deeper into despair. She stopped sleeping. Her skin lost color. She stopped returning calls. Nate noticed. Sharon noticed. Even Kane noticed, though he still said nothing. Amy returned once more, this time not with caution but urgency. She grabbed Lily's hand, looked into her eyes, and said, "Please don't destroy yourself for someone who's already gone." And finally, Lily broke. She collapsed into Amy's arms, sobbing, trembling, unable to reconcile the war inside her. She confessed the thoughts she hadn't dared to say aloud, that she loved the baby but feared she would come to hate herself if it all ended in agony. That she wanted to be brave but wasn't sure she had any courage left. That she missed Damien, but maybe she missed the fantasy of him more than the man himself. Amy said nothing at first. She simply held her, knowing that sometimes silence was the only comfort the broken could bear. The next day, Lily made an appointment, but not for an abortion. She asked for a second opinion. A different specialist. A third ultrasound. One more scan. She needed every scrap of hope, every last data point, to make her decision not from grief or guilt or pressure, but from clarity. In that sterile room, with the cold gel on her skin and the technician frowning at the monitor, Lily held her breath. And then something happened, a flicker. A stronger beat. A shift in the child's position. The technician's tone changed slightly. The results weren't perfect. But they were better. Marginally. But better. Enough to pause. Enough to delay. When Lily left that day, she didn't smile, but her posture changed. She walked straighter. She breathed deeper. The decision still loomed, but for now, she had bought herself time. And that time was precious. She spent it walking through the park alone, whispering apologies and promises to the child in her womb. She spent it writing letters, to Damien, to Kane, to the baby. She imagined futures both joyful and tragic. She cried. She raged. But she also hoped. The pressure from Amy remained. So did the watchful silence of those around her. But Lily knew now that the decision, whatever it would be, had to come from her, not from fear, not from love, not even from Damien's memory, but from the woman she was becoming. And that woman was no longer defined by grief or guilt or even motherhood. She was something else now. Something unshakable. Lily wasn't ready to say goodbye to the child. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Even if it meant enduring heartbreak. Even if it meant raising a child with impossible needs. Even if it meant breaking entirely and building herself anew. She would face it all. Not for Damien. Not even for the baby. But for herself. Because surviving wasn't enough anymore. She wanted to live. And living meant choosing. Even when every option hurt. Especially then. And in that pain, there was power. In that choice, there was love. And in that love, there was the faint, flickering heartbeat of something worth saving.